Hi, my name is Eddie Fallis. I'm a junior at Middlebury Union High School, and I serve on the ACSD school board as a student representative to the board. I'm here today with Chris Kramer. Chris, how are you today?
Oh, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm well,
Great.
thank you. The first question we want to ask is, why are you running, and what in your professional or personal background do you think best equips you to serve on the school board?
Okay, sure. Yeah, thanks for asking. For folks who may not know, we've got answers to these questions also in the paper, but I think we can expand on them a little bit more
Yeah,
here.
that's our goal.
Yeah. So what I focused on in the paper, which is certainly true, is in terms of interacting with the board. For me, I've been interacting closely with them for about 4 years. Since I became co-chair of Friends of Cornwall School. And honestly, for me in interacting with them, my experience, although I think it's changing a little bit, has been that you really have to speak up to kind of get your point across. And I know there's a lot of emphasis on consensus at the board level. And I do think that's a good thing. I don't think we want to spend the rest of our living days, in conflict. But at the same time, I've seen a number of issues go forward where without really speaking up about them, unfortunately, it's difficult to get traction. So for example, with the International Baccalaureate curriculum or with moving forward with the MUMS transition where they incorporated sixth grade, those were areas where I really felt like they just kind of kept rolling. And there were people speaking up. MUMS, for example, had like 33 teachers sign a letter, and one of them got up and spoke at a board meeting and outlined some real concerns. But unfortunately, most of those, at least initially, were not incorporated into the plan for that transition. So I think I'm a person who is willing to really kind of voice my concerns. And I think if I were on the board, it would also give me the opportunity to bring in other perspectives. One of the things that happens right now, typically, is that the board will ask the administration to come in and speak about their plans, but they often will not ask other groups, for example, teachers, community members, friends groups like PTAs, to come in. And that's definitely something I would push for. And you can actually, if it's overridden your request to bring in somebody, you, with two other board members, the way the board works, can make that request, and essentially, as long as it's reasonable, kind of has to be granted.
Yeah.
I will just say the one other thing, as I mentioned, I've been co-chair of Friends of Cornwall School for 4 years. I know that's a long answer already, so I won't go into too much detail, but I've done a lot in terms of trying to improve the school community, like starting after school programs and things like that. So if we have time, I can speak more to that.
Yeah, I think that'll be a good thing to talk about on our last question.
Exactly, yeah.
One thing that I want to ask you, though, very pressing point in our district right now, how satisfied are you with the decision that was made regarding closure of elementary schools with the new change to the charter that is now contingent on a supermajority vote of board members as well as a majority district vote as well?
Right. And actually, this is another one where I'm glad to be able to expand a little bit on what I wrote. Everything I wrote, I stand by, but I want to add a little bit too. So what I said was that I do believe that the supermajority, preservation of the supermajority was really important. When we all came together town by town to vote for the merger that we now have, the Union District, it was a really important selling point that there was a supermajority on the board that was required in order to close a school. So you need 10 out of the 13 board members to vote yes in order to close a school. And it was really important to people. I mean, that was talked about a lot at that time, to have that, because otherwise, if you just had a simple majority of 7, there are 7 Middlebury representatives on the board. Now, every representative, in theory, is supposed to represent the whole district, and that's true. I think people do try to do that. But nonetheless, the fact that 7 are residents of Middlebury, and that would be enough to sort of close the school on its own, was seen as potentially problematic. And so it was really important to people when they voted yes, to have that supermajority. There was discussion in the committee that proposed the change to Article 14 of scaling back that supermajority and bringing it back to, or I shouldn't say back, but taking it down to 7. And I'm really glad that some of the folks who were in favor of that initially ended up not voting for it at the board, at the full board level. The other thing I do believe in, but I don't know whether it's achievable right now or not, is personally, I believe in a town vote. I think each town should have a say and be able to vote on whether its school should be closed. I personally think that towns right now are kind of the heartbeat of Vermont, and that schools are the heartbeat of towns. I don't know whether that's achievable on the board right now, but the thing I would say is that there was a vote on the same day that they voted on the supermajority of the board. They also voted on a supermajority of district voters. That failed by 1 vote. I expect that when we have a new board after March, there would be enough votes to pass that. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on it. I know that people are kind of sick of this discussion, but I think you could just bring up the vote and say, okay, this is where the majority of the board legitimately feels we should go at this point, and pass a supermajority of district voters, and I would be in favor of that.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear. So earlier you were talking about sort of issues that have been run into with the International Baccalaureate program.
Yeah.
Do you believe that the International Baccalaureate program is working for ACSD right now?
I think working for ACSD is sort of a broad way to put it. I would say overall, frankly, and this may just be because people who have issues with it are more likely to speak up, I've primarily heard, frankly, negative feedback on International Baccalaureate. Now, what I perceive, so I have kids in 1st and 4th grade. So they're at the elementary level. Where I've heard the most pushback on IB is at the higher levels, in particular the diploma program, which is the 10th and, the 11th and 12th grade program, where, as I understand it, and you probably know better, but there's sort of a small handful of participation in that diploma program, and it tends to be the students that probably would be taking AP classes if it weren't for IB and that kind of thing, who are sort of at the top of their class. But in general, including the elementary and the middle years program, as well as the diploma program, and this is no secret, a lot of people are saying this, I think it's well known in the community that there's a concern about the equitability of IB and whether it works. It may work fine for students who would be fine anyway. And not only that, I don't want to speak ill of it, because I think it actually really brings something good to some of those students. I think the idea, for example, of global citizenship is really important these days. So I'm not, when I see my kids go through school and have some of that input and focus, I think that's great, But what I consistently hear is that it does not really work as well for kids who have special needs or learning profiles that require a little more accommodation, and that's just not a strength of the curriculum. I just want to take it back 1 second. I know I'm giving long answers to what I said before about speaking up, because IB is a real example where I think that what happened was it came in, frankly, in my view, as an agenda item. And it was pushed through despite a lot of concerns raised about it. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have done it, but I do believe there should have been more listening to the folks who were raising concerns, and there should have been more groups brought in at the board level to talk about that. And now, given that it's already been implemented, if you actually, and I've heard a lot of folks say, we really need to address this. And I will say that if you really want to address a curriculum that is spread throughout all levels of the school right now, you cannot do that without really speaking up and really pushing the issue and saying, guys, we're getting a lot of feedback here. We cannot ignore this. We have to focus on this. Frankly, if it were just me, for example, if I were chair, which I'm not at all expecting to be, but just to give you an idea, even not a chair, just on the board, I would argue that we need an ad hoc committee specifically around IB to investigate whether it's working well, who it's working for, who it's not working for, what the pros and cons are. I think that can be done in other contexts. You don't necessarily need it, but it's our driving curriculum. I think it's worth it, and I think it needs a real look, and I think that takes somebody willing to really speak up about it.
Yeah, totally. One of the other issues surrounding our district right now is the amount of repairs that need to happen within school buildings.
Sure.
A recent study suggested that it could take up to at least $100 million to bring all of ACSD school buildings up to code. How do you think the district should approach its plan to repair these school buildings that clearly need
Right.
attention?
Right. So when I got this question from the paper, I will say I reached out to Bruce McIntyre, who's the facilities manager for ACSD. Great guy, very knowledgeable. And I talked to him about, okay, what's really in this $100 million? What are we really talking about here? And how much of it is, truly necessary versus nice to have versus somewhere in the middle? And what I understand from Bruce is that up to, and this has been in the board presentations to some degree as well, but I think they could use some more clarity and some more specificity. Up to about $11.6 million is work that needs to be done more or less to bring the buildings up to code. There's some stuff that may not technically be in code, but it would be sort of equivalent. Things you really feel like you truly need to do, necessary. From that level, about 11 million to about 75 million, the way Bruce characterized it, and I'm paraphrasing and I hope he doesn't mind, but with stuff that it may not be technically necessary in the sense that a teacher can teach in that classroom if that repair is not done. I mean, he used the example of, a cabinet door that's coming down. Obviously that's not a high price item, but relatively speaking, but gives you an idea of the kind of thing. And he said, teachers can teach with those kinds of things in their classroom, but if we repaired those kinds of things, it's not the kind of project where you would really even notice that much of a difference in the classroom in terms of layout and physically if you walked in, which gives you the sense that they're really sort of talking about basic functions. Then above the $75 million level up to around that 100 million figure that you're talking about, that's where you're talking about more kind of things that would improve the learning environment, lighting, quality, and air quality and things like that, that would improve the learning environment. All of that stuff, just to be clear, is really good. I mean, there's nothing, I have no problems, with things that might improve the learning environment. I do have issues to some degree with some of the proposals that I believe our outside consultants brought in to make our schools what they would call 21st century schools, modernize. It's not that I think that that's necessarily a bad idea. It's just that I don't think it's necessarily the best fit for our particular district. I think that our focus should be on teaching and learning as much as it can. And given all of the angst around operating budget right now, not capital budget, in other words, not building improvements, but just teaching and learning, I don't think this is the time to really throw our resources into our capital budget unless we really feel like we need to. So what I would do is I would ask Bruce and his team, not outside consultants, although we have that report, but now as a next step, ask Bruce and his team to really go through project by project and present sort of a compendium of projects to the board that he really feels like are either necessary or very important for teaching and learning. And that's where I would stop at this point.
So one of the things with teaching and learning is, and you talked about this a little bit with the IB program, is issues involving special education within the schools. There were changes to special education mandated by Act 173. And the demand, and how would you balance special education needs with all the other demands on our schools right now?
Right. No, I think it's actually a really important question that has not gotten a lot of focus in the public. There have been some presentations to the board on this, but my sense is that it has not sort of spread to residents, and so there's not a lot of awareness of what's coming down the pike. And I'm really glad that questions are starting to be asked by the media about this, because I think it's going to be really important and going to be a fundamental shift in teaching and learning. So I'm sure others have probably said this, but just really briefly, the basic change is that instead of reimbursing for whatever costs you may identify for special needs, special education, it's now going to be a block grant formula. So you look, and actually it's a block grant formula not based on special ed, it's based just on census data. So whatever your district has in terms of number of students, that's the basis of your block grant. And you get that upfront amount, and that's it. Now, As it happens, it looks like ACSD may not necessarily lose that much money, but even so, compared to the old system, but even so, it creates a different kind of dynamic when you have an upfront pool that then everybody has to compete for. So that's going to be, potentially an issue that creates tension. The other piece of this is that there's an expectation that costs will stay down or actually come down further because the drive is to address 80% of special education needs inside the classroom through training of the primary teacher. That is a lot to ask of those teachers. And there is research, and I don't deny it, that ideally a lot of special education needs can be met best by a well-trained teacher. But in my view, that's all else equal. And a lot of times it's not all else equal. They have a lot that they're managing already under the current system in the classroom.
Yeah.
So this is a perfect example to me of where we need real discussion and not just, of course, we need to bring in the the administration and have them, which they have to a degree, talk about what this is going to look like. But we need other stakeholders at the table, including families, including, probably some outside experts on special ed, and including the teachers themselves, to really give us a sense of how can this work best? How can we do this? Instead of just saying, okay, we've come up with a plan and this is how we're going to do it. We really genuinely need people at the table, and not just to hear them out, but to actually incorporate their feedback into how we go forward with this.
Yeah, totally. Is there anything else you'd like to say right now?
Well, I guess I would mention, as I briefly did initially, that I've done a lot of work over the last 4 years as co-chair of Friends of Cornwall School. And there are things in there that I would hope to bring to sort of a more district-wide approach. So, for example, one of the things that we were able to do once we kind of came back from remote learning was to start to address equity in our school, but also in terms of things that school doesn't cover. So the biggest thing that we did recently was we launched after-school partnerships with several community organizations around here. That included the Middlebury Community Music Center, Middlebury Studio School, MALT, the Outdoor Education Program, Middlebury Area Land Trust, and Taekwondo Kicks, which is, obviously a Taekwondo program. And we've got a few, we were just chatting before the program started about a drama program that's about to be coming online, somebody from the Oxford Rug Hooking School, so it's like a fabric type thing. So we've got a lot of community partnerships going, which allows us not necessarily to have to shoulder the full burden of providing after school to our families, but reaching out and building connections with our existing resources in this community, of which there are a lot. This is a very vibrant community for its size. So bringing things like that to other schools throughout the district from a board perspective is something I would definitely try to do. The other piece of that we were able to do in this year, and I think we're exploring ways to continue it, it's challenging, but we're going to try, is that we were able to make all of those programs free this year to all students. So there were no equity issues regarding participation. Last year we had it as a tuition-based program, and we heard feedback anecdotally, but from several parents, that they actually didn't participate because of the funding issue and the cost. And we had offered to provide financial aid through Friends of Cornwall School, sort of informally. We're a small school, and nobody took us up on it. And I think that speaks to concern about, not wanting to ask, which is understandable. And so this year, by just being able to fund it through, it was actually a federal grant, some of the recovery money that came through the town, working with the select board, we were able to just kind of take that equity issue off the table. And so I think that's something that we'll want to continue to explore, how to do that, not just in Cornwall, but ideally throughout the district.
Okay, awesome. Chris, thank you for coming in to talk with us today. And to everyone watching, thank you for listening. And I would like to remind you to go out and vote as well as participate in your town's town meeting day. Thank you.
Thanks very much.